Office confession. Daniel Mercer stood in that corner office on a Friday evening, his career hanging by a thread, his heart pounding against his ribs. 3 months of carefully avoided eye contact. 3 months of professional distance masking something dangerous. And now Lillian Hart, the woman who controlled his future, demanded an answer he couldn't give without risking it all. The fluorescent lights in Morrison & Associates hummed their usual monotonous tune, casting sterile white across Daniel Mercer's desk as he stared at the quarterly report without really seeing it. The numbers blurred together. Revenue projections, cost analyses, profit margins, all of it background noise to the one constant thought that had colonized his mind for the past 3 months. Don't look up. Don't look at her office. Don't make this harder than it already is. His fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, 10 years of corporate experience guiding them through formulas and forecasts, while his mind wandered dangerous territory. It was 6:47 p.m. on a Friday, and the 15th floor had emptied hours ago. Most of his colleagues had rushed out at 5 o'clock sharp, eager to start their weekends. Daniel had volunteered to stay late, finishing the projections due Monday morning. It wasn't dedication that kept him here. It was strategy. Staying late meant avoiding the morning meetings where Lillian Hart reviewed departmental performance. It meant skipping the afternoon briefings where she walked through their wing, her presence like electricity in the air. It meant he could maintain the careful distance he'd constructed between them, a distance that felt more fragile with each passing day. The sound of a door opening shattered his concentration. Daniel's hands froze over the keyboard. He didn't need to look up to know who had just stepped out of the corner office. He could feel it, that shift in the atmosphere that happened whenever she was near, like the pressure change before a storm. Daniel. Her voice carried across the empty floor, professional and measured. But there was something underneath it, tension that hadn't been there 3 months ago. He kept his eyes fixed on his monitor, watching her reflection approach in the darkened screen. Ms. Hart, I thought you'd left already. I had some contracts to review. Her footsteps stopped a few feet from his desk, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle with notes of jasmine that he'd started associating with sleepless nights and guilt. It's almost 7. You should go home. Just finishing these projections, he said, forcing his voice to remain steady. Another 15 minutes. Silence stretched between them. In his peripheral vision, he could see her standing there, arms crossed. Those razor-sharp heels she always wore making her stand just tall enough that his seated position put them at eye level. If he looked up, Daniel, can we talk? For words. For simple words that sent his heart rate spiking. About the Henderson account, he asked, grasping at professional territory. I have the preliminary numbers ready for. About you avoiding me for 3 months. The air left his lungs. His hands slid off the keyboard, coming to rest in his lap where she couldn't see them shaking. The screensaver kicked in, replacing the spreadsheet with slowly drifting stars, and suddenly he had no excuse to keep staring at the monitor. I don't know what you mean, he said quietly. My office. Now. It wasn't a request. Daniel stood slowly, buying himself seconds to construct some kind of defense. Some plausible explanation that didn't involve the truth. But as he finally met Lillian Hart's gaze, every rehearsed excuse evaporated like morning mist. Her gray eyes held something he'd never seen there before. Not anger, not confusion. Hurt. The walk to her office felt like miles instead of yards. Daniel's mind raced through the past 3 months, cataloging every interaction, every carefully maintained boundary, every moment he'd engineered to avoid exactly this confrontation. It had started innocuously enough. A company mixer in November, the annual pre-holiday gathering where management pretended to be human and employees pretended to enjoy cheap wine and cheaper conversation. Daniel had attended out of obligation, planning to make an appearance, shake a few hands, and escape home to relieve his sister from babysitting duty. He'd been standing by the windows overlooking the city when Lillian Hart had approached, 2 glasses of wine in hand. You look like you'd rather be anywhere else, she'd said, offering him a glass. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who feels exactly the same way. She'd smiled then. Not the corporate smile she wore in meetings, but something real and slightly melancholic. I'm Lillian Hart. Daniel Mercer, from Strategic Planning. You know my name. I know everyone's name. It's my job. She gestured to the crowd behind them. Though sometimes I wish it wasn't. They'd talk for an hour. Not about work, not about quarterly targets or corporate strategy. She'd asked about his son, 8-year-old Jake, who was currently obsessed with dinosaurs and convinced he'd discovered a new species in their backyard. Daniel had asked about her late husband, gently, and she'd surprised him by answering honestly. "It's been 2 years," she'd said, staring out at the city lights. "Everyone expects you to move on, to be back to normal by now. But what they don't understand is that normal disappeared with him. You're just creating a new version of it, and it never quite fits right." Daniel had understood completely. His wife hadn't died, but she'd left when Jake was 3, deciding motherhood wasn't what she wanted after all. 5 years of single parenthood had taught him exactly what Lillian meant about creating new normals that never quite fit. That conversation should have ended when the mixer did. Instead, it had continued into weekly coffee runs that turned into lunch meetings that somehow shifted from professional to personal, without either of them quite noticing when the line blurred. Until the morning Daniel had walked into a strategy session, seen Lillian presenting at the front of the room, and felt his stomach drop as he realized the truth. He wasn't just enjoying their friendship anymore. He was looking forward to seeing her with an intensity that terrified him. He was thinking about her during his commute, during his son's soccer practice, during the quiet hours after Jake fell asleep, when the house felt too empty. He was falling for his boss. And that realization had triggered 3 months of self-imposed exile. Lillian's office was corner real estate. Windows on 2 walls offering a panoramic view of the city, transitioning from day to night. The skyline glittered against the deepening blue of twilight, countless office windows illuminated like earthbound stars. She closed the door behind them, and Daniel felt the click reverberate through his chest. "Sit," she said, moving around her mahogany desk. "I'd rather stand." "Daniel, if this is about my performance," he interrupted, desperation making him reckless. "The Henderson projections will be ready Monday morning, and the quarterly analysis is ahead of schedule. I know I've been less visible lately, but the work speaks for. Why won't you look at me?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He stood there, 6 feet from her desk, hands shoved in his pockets to hide their trembling. Outside, a plane's lights drifted across the darkening sky. Inside, silence pressed down like a weight. "I look at you," he said weakly. "No, you don't." Lillian's voice was quiet now, controlled, but something raw edged beneath it. "3 months ago, we were friends. We talked. We laughed. You looked at me like I was a person, not just your department head." She paused, and he could hear her breathing, measured but slightly too quick. "Now you can barely stand to be in the same room. You avoid morning meetings. You skip the Thursday briefings. When we pass in the hallway, you find somewhere else to be. I've been busy with." "Don't." The single word cut through his excuse. "Don't insult me with professional justifications. I want the truth, Daniel. Did I do something? Say something? Because I've spent 3 months trying to figure out what I did to make you pull away, and I can't." Her voice cracked just slightly. "I can't think of what it was." The crack in her composure destroyed something in him. The careful walls he'd built, the professional distance he'd maintained, the protection he'd constructed around them both. All of it crumbled in the face of her thinking she'd driven him away. Daniel closed his eyes, drawing in a long breath. When he opened them, he forced himself to do the one thing he'd been avoiding for months. He looked at her, really looked at her. Lillian Hart sat behind her desk in a charcoal blazer and cream blouse, her dark hair pulled back in its usual professional style. At 42, she carried herself with the kind of quiet authority that made junior executives nervous and board members respectful. But right now, in the soft light of her desk lamp, with her carefully maintained composure showing hairline fractures, she looked vulnerable in a way that made his chest ache. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said quietly. "Then what is it?" "It's that when I look at you." He stopped, searching for words that wouldn't destroy everything. "You forget." "Forget what?" "That you're my boss." The confession escaped before he could stop it. "When I look at you, I don't see the executive who controls my career. I don't see the woman who can fire me with a signature. I see," he faltered. "What do you see?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I see the woman who stays late because her house feels too empty. I see the person who remembers that my son likes dinosaurs and asks about his latest discoveries. I see someone who understands what it's like to build a new normal when the old one disappeared." He met her eyes fully now, past the point of retreat. "I see someone who makes me feel alive again after years of just surviving. And that terrifies me, Lillian, Because feeling that way about your boss is a catastrophically bad idea. The confession hung in the air between them, irreversible and raw. Lillian didn't move, didn't speak. The only sound was the soft hum of the building's ventilation system and the distant wail of a siren somewhere in the city below. Finally, she stood, moving around the desk with careful, measured steps. She stopped a few feet away, close enough that Daniel could see the rapid pulse at her throat. "Do you know why I asked you to stay after the mixer that night?" she asked. He shook his head, not trusting his voice. "Because for 2 hours, I'd been watching you check your phone, counting down the minutes until you could leave. And I recognized that look, that need to escape from forced cheerfulness into something real." She paused. "I thought maybe we could escape together, just for a conversation. Something genuine in a sea of corporate performance." "Lillian, I'm not finished." Her gray eyes held his. "You think you're the only one who's been terrified for 3 months? When you started avoiding me, I told myself it was for the best. We'd gotten too comfortable, too familiar. The boundaries were blurring, and someone needed to restore them. I convinced myself you were being smart, professional, protecting us both." Her voice dropped. "But the truth is, I missed you. I missed our conversations. I missed having someone who saw past the executive armor to the person underneath. And I hated myself for missing it, because feeling that way about someone who works for me is a catastrophically bad idea," Daniel finished softly. "Yes." The word was barely audible. They stood there, 3 feet of charged air between them, both afraid to move closer and unable to step back. "What do we do?" Daniel asked. Before Lillian could answer, her phone buzzed on the desk, then it buzzed in his pocket. The synchronization was eerie, ominous. Lillian reached for her phone, and Daniel watched her expression shift from vulnerable to guarded in an instant. The executive mask slammed back into place, but not before he saw the flash of fear. "What is it?" he asked. She looked up at him, and in that moment, he knew whatever fragile hope had just bloomed between them was about to be crushed. "It's an email from Human Resources," she said quietly. "There's been an anonymous complaint about inappropriate conduct between a senior executive and a direct report. They're requesting formal interviews." She paused, her knuckles white around the phone. "Starting Monday morning." The descent from hope to dread happened in the space of a heartbeat. Daniel pulled out his own phone, confirming what he already knew. The same email, same corporate language, same implications that felt like a noose tightening around his career. An anonymous report has raised concerns regarding workplace conduct between Lillian Hart, VP of Strategic Development, and Daniel Mercer, Senior Analyst in Strategic Planning. In accordance with company policy, HR will conduct formal interviews with both parties and relevant witnesses beginning Monday, March 18th. Until this investigation concludes, both parties are advised to limit professional interactions to essential business communication only. "Who would report this?" Daniel said, more to himself than to her. "We haven't. There's nothing to report. We've been careful. Too careful." Lillian was already moving, her mind shifting into crisis management mode. "It doesn't matter if there's nothing concrete. Perception is enough. Someone saw us having coffee too many times or noticed that we talked more than strictly necessary or simply decided that any relationship between a VP and an analyst was worth investigating. This is my fault." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, panic clawing at his throat. "I should have been more distant, more." "This is no one's fault," Lillian interrupted sharply. "We haven't broken any rules. We haven't crossed any lines, but we wanted to." The admission hung between them, undeniable and damning. Lillian sank back against her desk, the executive armor cracking again. Wanting isn't a crime. In this situation, it might as well be. Daniel's mind was already racing through the implications, the professional calculus that would determine who fell and who survived. "You know how this plays out. HR will interview everyone. They'll find nothing concrete because there's nothing to find. But the investigation itself will raise questions, create doubt. And when they can't prove misconduct but can't entirely dismiss the concerns either, they'll make a recommendation, which will be that one of us transfers to another department. And since you're the VP with a decade of institutional knowledge, and I'm the senior analyst who's been here 3 years." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Lillian's jaw tightened. "They can't force you out over unproven allegations. They won't have to force anything. They'll make it clear that my continued presence creates an uncomfortable situation. They'll suggest that a fresh start would be best for everyone. And technically, they'll be right. The bitterness in his voice surprised him. I'm a single father, Lillian. I can't afford to be unemployed while I fight a battle I'll probably lose anyway. So you'll just quit. I'll do whatever I have to do to make sure my son has a roof over his head and food on the table. He met her eyes. Even if that means walking away from. He stopped, unable to finish. From what? She pressed. From the first person who's made me feel like myself again in 5 years. The confession stripped away any remaining pretense. They stood there in her office, the city lights casting long shadows across the floor, both knowing that Monday morning would begin a process that would tear apart whatever they'd almost had. Lillian pushed off from the desk, closing the distance between them until she was standing close enough that Daniel could see the gold flecks in her gray eyes. I won't let you fall alone, she said fiercely. If this costs you your job, I'll fight it. I'll go to the CEO myself. And destroy your own career in the process. Daniel shook his head. You've worked too hard, sacrificed too much to get where you are. I won't let you burn it all down for something that was never even allowed to begin. Don't I get a say in what I'm willing to risk? Not when the risk is everything you've built. Lillian's hand came up, hovering near his face, but not quite touching. You don't get to make that choice for me. Someone has to be rational here. Rational? Her laugh was hollow. We're standing in my office after hours, having confessed feelings we shouldn't have, facing an investigation that could ruin us both. And you want to talk about rational? Her hand dropped. Maybe I'm tired of being rational. Maybe I'm tired of choosing safety over living. Lillian, my husband died in a stupid, random car accident on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, she said, her voice intense. One moment he was texting me about dinner, the next he was gone. And you know what I learned? That you can do everything right, follow all the rules, make all the safe choices, and lose everything anyway. Her eyes glistened. So maybe I don't want to make the safe choice this time. Daniel felt something crack open in his chest. What are you saying? I'm saying that Monday morning, when HR calls us in for those interviews, I'm going to tell them the truth. Which truth? All of it. That we became friends. That those friendships developed into something more. That we haven't.